5 minutes changed everything. Catherine entered what was supposed to be a routine private royal briefing, carrying no intention of challenging the arrangement already approved around her. Then, a sealed letter connected to Diana was placed before her. Within minutes, the Princess of Wales had stopped the meeting, rejected the palace plan, and issued one unmistakable instruction. The royal arrangement was cancelled immediately. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine sat inside Kensington Palace with William and 2 senior household officials, expecting a final discussion about upcoming ceremonies. The royal arrangement, a coordinated palace plan controlling how senior family members would appear and participate at official events, had been months in preparation. Nothing suggested disaster that morning until one official placed the preserved letter before her and explained that it had surfaced during a review of Diana's private archive. Catherine opened it carefully, but her expression changed at once. William watched her fingers tighten around the pages as she read one passage twice. Diana's warning was painfully direct. Never allow palace machinery to decide personal loyalty simply because public harmony looks easier. The words struck Catherine because the arrangement would have required both her and William to accept tightly controlled ceremonial positioning and family appearances without room for independent change. William leaned forward when Catherine set the letter down. She asked the officials to leave, and the door closed behind them. Only then did shock turn into anger. He reminded her that senior royal figures had already approved the plan, and that canceling it now would look extraordinary. Catherine did not hesitate. She told him continuing would be worse, because she could no longer pretend the structure was harmless after reading what his mother had feared. The silence between them grew heavier when William noticed a second detail. The letter had not been newly written, discovered, or anonymously supplied. It had been preserved for years inside a personal archive and had emerged because old material was being reviewed. That raised a question neither could ignore. Why had these words never been placed before him before now? Catherine closed the folder, but William did not look away. He understood that this was no longer about schedules, entrances, or protocol. Diana's words had reopened something buried inside his family, something powerful enough to make Catherine stop an approved royal plan in a single meeting. And once William understood why those handwritten words had shaken Catherine so deeply, the question was no longer whether she had overreacted. It was who stood to lose the most from her decision. For Catherine, the letter was a warning. For William, it was something far more painful. A voice from a mother he had lost before he was old enough to understand the battles surrounding her. Suddenly, a palace arrangement that had seemed administrative became intensely personal. Catherine could see the conflict in her husband's face, because whatever decision they made next would force William to choose between royal continuity and Diana's unfinished fears. William moved away from the table and stood in silence, trying to separate duty from memory. As heir, he had spent years learning how to carry responsibility without allowing grief to control every decision. But Diana's letter had broken through that discipline. Catherine remained seated, the pages resting across her lap, and watched him struggle with words that felt less like history and more like a message delivered directly into their marriage. Catherine understood exactly why the moment mattered. She was not rejecting the monarchy or dismissing the need for ceremonial order. The arrangement they had cancelled was part of palace protocol, meaning the agreed rules used to organize official appearances, family roles, and public duties. What frightened her was the idea that loyalty to those rules could require personal judgment to disappear. She could support tradition, but she could not accept silence as the price of belonging. William finally admitted what had been building inside him. Reading Diana's words felt like overhearing a conversation he had never been meant to hear, one that exposed pressures he had been too young to understand. Catherine did not interrupt. She knew his mother's experience had shaped the way he viewed royal life, and she also knew that canceling the arrangement could now be painted as defiance rather than protection. The warning itself made that fear harder to ignore. Diana had written about arrangements made for harmony that eventually demand silence, and Catherine could no longer see those words as accidental. To her, The message was not an attack on ceremony. It was a warning against systems that slowly remove choice while still calling themselves unity. William looked down again and noticed something near the bottom of the final page. A handwritten notation indicated that Diana wanted the message preserved for her sons when they were old enough to understand it. His entire mood changed. He stopped arguing about consequences and asked the question neither of them could avoid any longer. What had happened to his mother that made her believe this warning needed to survive her? The answer lay years behind them, but one forgotten royal incident would reveal why Diana's warning suddenly felt frighteningly relevant. Every hidden letter has a moment that created it. Diana's was no different. Buried beneath years of royal history was one specific incident she apparently never forgot. A private disagreement following a major ceremonial appearance, when an arrangement designed to protect royal unity instead left her feeling controlled and isolated. That evening became the emotional trigger behind the words Catherine was now holding decades later. Diana had already learned that ceremonial agreements could reach far beyond where someone stood or when someone arrived. A formal anniversary service at St. Paul's Cathedral, the major London church used for important national and royal occasions, had ended with smiles, careful timing, and apparent unity. But behind that polished order sat a private structure deciding who would speak, who would accompany whom, and which family tensions would never be allowed to appear in public. Diana returned from that service carrying frustration she could no longer ignore. During a private conversation afterward, she challenged a newly imposed arrangement governing her future joint appearances, and asked why it had been approved without giving her meaningful choice. The answer was cold, in its simplicity. Changing it now would create questions. She understood exactly what that meant. Avoiding public curiosity had become more important than acknowledging what she actually felt. Diana left that exchange wounded, not because she had been shouted down, but because she had been quietly overruled. Later that evening, she began writing. The hidden letter was not a call to destroy royal tradition or reject duty. It was a warning to her sons never to confuse compulsory agreement with genuine family unity. Harmony forced through silence, she believed, eventually stopped being harmony at all. William absorbed the account with growing discomfort. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the desk as Catherine explained why that old incident mattered now. His mother had not written after some explosive public scandal. She had written after a private humiliation so controlled that almost nobody would have known it happened. That realization cut deeper because it made the warning feel intimate, deliberate, and painfully specific. Catherine watched his resistance begin to disappear. She believed the cancelled arrangement carried the same dangerous pattern: decisions made in the name of stability, followed by pressure to accept them because changing course might look untidy. William finally understood that she had not acted against the monarchy. She had acted against repeating the kind of silence Diana had feared. Then the pressure shifted. Someone else had already been told that Catherine had cancelled the arrangement, and that person was no longer willing to discuss the matter through officials. By the time Catherine entered the next room, the letter had stopped being a private discovery and become the center of a royal confrontation. The confrontation was never loud at first. That made it more dangerous. Catherine entered knowing her decision had already unsettled the household, while Charles was waiting for an explanation that could preserve both authority and family unity. William stood between them emotionally, if not physically. On the table rested Diana's letter, the one object capable of transforming a disagreement over protocol into a reckoning over the monarchy's past. Charles understood the cancellation threatened more than a carefully planned appearance. Months of coordination were tied to the arrangement, and reversing it now could expose disagreement among the senior royal family at exactly the moment stability mattered most. Catherine understood that danger too. The ceremonial plan, the agreed structure deciding how senior royals would participate in official events, carried public consequences, but she refused to let those consequences silence private judgment. Charles looked directly at Catherine and asked whether she truly intended to overturn an established royal agreement because of a private letter written decades earlier. She held his gaze. Her answer was calm, but there was no retreat in it. She had cancelled the arrangement because Diana's warning showed what could happen when people surrendered judgment simply to avoid embarrassment. Continuing now, she said, would mean knowingly repeating the pattern. William finally broke the silence. He told his father that Diana's words could not be dismissed simply because hearing them was painful. Charles lowered his eyes for a moment, and the change in him was immediate. The king had entered expecting to defend order. Now he was being asked to confront why that order existed, and whether protecting it had become more important than protecting the people inside it. Catherine then pointed to the clause that had disturbed her most. The wording would have prevented her from making independent changes to her ceremonial role without collective household approval. Household approval meant agreement from the senior offices coordinating royal duties, not merely Catherine's own consent. To her, that condition echoed Diana's warning with disturbing precision. Harmony could become control when nobody felt free to say no. Charles reached for the letter instead of ordering the arrangement restored. He read slowly. When he recognized Diana's handwriting, the argument changed again. These were no longer abstract claims about palace procedure. They came from a woman whose pain was woven into his own history. William watched his father's expression tighten, while Catherine remained still, waiting to see whether memory would change authority. Then another question surfaced, colder than the first. If nobody in that room believed the restriction was reasonable, who had given it enough power to survive? That question shifted the battle away from emotion and toward power, and the answer would prove that Catherine's decision had disturbed more than one royal relationship. Royal decisions rarely belong to one person. Behind every public appearance sits an invisible machinery of private secretaries, ceremonial planners, household officials, and family expectations. Catherine's cancellation had suddenly forced that machinery into daylight. What appeared to be a simple royal arrangement was actually supported by layers of authority, and when William began asking who inserted its strictest condition, the room became noticeably uncomfortable. William met privately with his senior aide and asked a simple question that carried dangerous weight. Who had insisted that changes to Catherine's role required broad approval? The arrangement had grown through months of discussion involving officials coordinating duties for Catherine, William, Charles, and Camilla. A royal household is the network of staff that organizes a senior royal's official work, and several households had helped shape this plan together. What looked like one decision was actually the product of many smaller ones. The aide hesitated before answering. The disputed wording, he explained, had been presented as a stabilizing measure meant to stop last-minute disagreements from becoming visible during major ceremonies. Nobody wanted confusion in public, and nobody wanted old family tensions reopening behind closed doors. So the clause remained. William understood the problem immediately. Fear of disruption had slowly been turned into a rule. Catherine waited alone nearby while those discussions continued. She removed her engagement ring for a moment, turned it between her fingers, then placed it back. The gesture revealed more than words could have. This was no longer only about an event schedule. It had become about marriage, personal choice, and the possibility that Diana's warning had reached directly into the structure surrounding Catherine's own life. William pressed again for a name, but none came. No single royal had ordered the restriction. It had emerged through compromise, caution, accumulated assumptions, and the quiet belief that keeping everything smooth mattered more than asking whether the rule itself was fair. That made the problem worse. There was no one person to confront, because the system had created the restriction almost by instinct. Charles absorbed that conclusion with visible unease. He quietly admitted that this was exactly what made Diana's words so uncomfortable. Rules could become controlling, without anyone consciously deciding to control another person. The king could challenge an individual order, but changing a habit embedded across several households demanded something deeper. Then the practical consequences arrived. The arrangement was formally suspended, which meant invitations, appearances, hosting duties, and ceremonial roles now had to be rewritten. And when Camilla received the revised schedule, she discovered that one of those changes affected her directly. The hidden letter had won Catherine the immediate battle, but its first consequences were about to land on someone who had never expected Diana's voice to reach into the present. The first visible consequence arrived without ceremony. Camilla was reviewing the schedule for an upcoming palace event when an aide quietly placed the amended plan beside her. One section had disappeared. Another had been rewritten. The arrangement Catherine cancelled had also determined how several senior royals would appear together, and its collapse meant Camilla's own position at the event would now change. Camilla read the revised schedule once, then again more slowly. The suspended arrangement had coordinated entrances, seating, and shared hosting duties across several ceremonial engagements. A ceremonial engagement is an official royal appearance organized around a formal public duty, and the original plan had tied several family members together under one rigid structure. Now those responsibilities were being separated, and the queen consort immediately understood that this was not a small adjustment. Camilla looked up and asked whether Charles had approved the changes. The aide explained that the revisions followed Catherine's cancellation and William's decision to support her. She placed the schedule flat against the table and said nothing. Anger was there, but it was mixed with something more difficult. Diana's private words had somehow crossed decades and were now shaping decisions around the current generation. For Camilla, that meant living once again inside an emotional history she could never fully leave behind. The change itself carried real weight. Catherine would now have greater freedom to shape her own ceremonial appearances instead of being locked into a single family formation. The old expectation that senior royal women should always present one coordinated public front had also been weakened. Camilla understood what that meant immediately. The monarchy was not rejecting unity, but it was redefining what unity could look like. Charles spoke to her privately later and did not soften the truth. Restoring the arrangement by force, he said, would only deepen the conflict and make Catherine's objection look more justified. Camilla asked whether he truly intended to let the cancellation stand. The king answered that pushing harder now would turn a private disagreement into a lasting family fracture. Camilla remained quiet after that. She knew Charles had chosen accommodation over confrontation, and she also knew William's support had made reversal nearly impossible. The old structure had not simply been paused, it had lost the confidence of the people expected to live under it. Then the noise around the decision finally fell away. Later that night, Catherine and William found themselves alone, with no aides, schedules, or palace officials left between them. Away from palace machinery, husband and wife would make the decision that transformed Diana's letter from a source of conflict into something far more powerful. Late that evening, there were no officials left to persuade, and no protocol documents left to examine. Only Catherine, William, and Diana's letter remained. The argument surrounding them had become enormous, yet the decision itself was suddenly simple. William needed to decide whether his mother's words belonged to the past, or whether they should change how he protected his own family in the present. Catherine spoke first. She told William she had never wanted the letter to become a weapon against Charles, or anyone else inside the family. Her concern was their own marriage, and the quiet danger of allowing decisions to harden around them, simply because those decisions had already been approved. Royal structure, the system of rules and agreements used to organize duties and appearances, was necessary, but she believed it became dangerous when questioning it was treated like disloyalty. William listened without interrupting. He admitted that his first reaction had been fear, not anger. Catherine's cancellation had reopened wounds surrounding Diana that he had spent years learning to carry privately. He worried that every old pain would return at once, forcing the family back into arguments nobody knew how to resolve. Catherine answered softly that perhaps those wounds remained powerful, because nobody had ever truly learned from them. The silence changed after that. William looked again at the letter and finally stopped treating it as evidence in an argument. It was his mother speaking from a moment of pain, but it was also a warning about choices he now had the power to make differently. He told Catherine that tradition could guide them, but it could not become an excuse for surrendering judgment. William folded the letter carefully and made his decision. He would stand behind the cancellation within the family, even if it created discomfort. Catherine's tension finally broke. She reached across the table and took his hand, understanding that his support meant more than winning a dispute. It meant he had chosen to protect their shared voice before palace expectations could define it for them. William went further. Future arrangements involving their household would require direct consent from both of them, rather than being treated as automatic extensions of broader palace planning. He also refused to circulate Diana's entire letter. The private passages would remain private, because learning from her pain was one thing. Turning that pain into a weapon was something else entirely. Mourning, however, brought a different reality. News of the letter and Catherine's cancellation had already escaped the walls that contained them. What began behind closed doors was now impossible to contain, and one image outside Buckingham Palace would come to symbolize exactly how the country understood the confrontation. By sunrise, a private family decision had become a national conversation. The fascination was not merely that Catherine had cancelled a royal arrangement. It was that Diana's hidden words had apparently influenced that decision decades after her death. Suddenly, broadcasters, newspaper editors, and crowds outside royal residences were debating the same question the family had confronted privately. How much should the monarchy learn from its own emotional history? Catherine understood why the reaction was so intense. She had not simply refused a schedule. She had challenged the assumption that an approved palace arrangement should remain untouched once personal concerns emerged. Palace officials released a restrained statement confirming that forthcoming appearances were being revised after internal discussions. Those appearances were official public duties, carried out by senior royals, and the statement carefully avoided publishing Diana's private correspondence or explaining its most personal passages. William watched the coverage over breakfast and grew visibly uncomfortable as his mother's name dominated the discussion again. He had spent years protecting the boundary between Diana's public legacy and the private grief surrounding her. Catherine reminded him that keeping the most intimate passages sealed was the right decision. The letter could influence their choices without becoming entertainment for everyone else. And William knew that distinction mattered. Charles faced a different kind of pressure. A broadcaster described the episode as a generational correction inside the monarchy, suggesting that Catherine and William were changing how royal duty responded to old family pain. The king turned off the television before the segment ended. He remained quiet afterward, because the phrase carried an uncomfortable truth. Accepting change did not erase the past, but refusing change could allow the same mistakes to survive. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public reaction found one powerful symbol. A small crowd gathered near the gates, and one woman held flowers beside a handwritten card reading, "Listen to Diana. Protect the family." Cameras captured the moment, and the message quickly became the image people associated with the entire confrontation. It transformed a complicated dispute about protocol into something simple and emotional, the belief that duty should never come before human dignity. Newspapers increasingly framed Catherine not as rejecting monarchy, but as forcing it to separate tradition from unnecessary control. That distinction changed the mood around her cancellation. What had initially looked like defiance began to look like restraint backed by principle. Yet Catherine knew public approval could not make the final decision for her. Diana's letter had already changed the family. Now she had to decide what place those words would hold in their future. The headlines would fade, the crowds would eventually leave, but Catherine's final choice ensured that the lesson behind Diana's words would remain. The real significance of the hidden letter was never that Diana somehow reached from the past to control the present. It was that Catherine recognized a pattern and chose not to repeat it. By canceling the arrangement, she forced William, Charles, and the wider household to confront a painful truth. Monarchy could preserve tradition without demanding silence, and family unity meant very little if it existed only on paper. Catherine knew the decision now needed something stronger than emotion. The original royal arrangement was permanently withdrawn, and a replacement framework gave her and William greater direct authority over how they would take part in future joint ceremonies. That framework, simply the agreed structure governing who participates and under what conditions, mattered because it turned one dramatic cancellation into a lasting change. The couple would no longer be expected to accept arrangements automatically because palace offices had already approved them. Charles accepted the revised approach with more reflection than resistance. The king did not treat the change as a personal defeat, because he understood that royal continuity sometimes depends on recognizing when an old method has stopped serving the people bound by it. He had spent the crisis defending stability, yet even he could now see that stability without trust would eventually become another form of pressure. Catherine returned Diana's letter to its protective folder and refused to make the private passages public. She could have allowed those words to become ammunition, but she chose restraint instead. William understood the importance of that decision immediately. He thanked her for recognizing something in his mother's warning that he had initially found too painful to confront, and he admitted that the letter no longer felt like an invitation to reopen grief. It felt like permission to prevent the same mistakes from being repeated. Catherine closed the archive box and pushed it toward William. She told him quietly that their future should never require them to pretend everything was fine when it was not. The prince accepted the box and understood the boundary she was drawing. Duty could demand discipline. It could demand sacrifice and compromise. But it could never demand that judgment, honesty, and family trust be surrendered simply to protect appearances. The verdict was finally clear. Diana's hidden letter had not destroyed a royal arrangement. It had exposed why that arrangement could no longer survive. Catherine transformed an old warning into a new principle. William chose family honesty over institutional habit, and Charles allowed the monarchy to adapt rather than harden. The crisis ended not with rebellion, but with reform. And in the end, Diana's most powerful legacy was not the secret she left behind. It was the courage her words gave another Princess of Wales to say, with absolute clarity, that some royal patterns deserve to end. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.